Good evening. My name is Amy Chatlis, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to the 2017 Northeast Ohio Public Policy Series. Tonight's program is titled Ohio State Budget Cuts and Their Impact. Before I introduce tonight's moderator, I want to recognize and thank a few organizations that were especially instrumental in making this year's Public Policy Series possible. Our program partners are the Laura and Alvin Siegel Lifelong Learning Program and Case Western Reserve University, the League of Women Voters, Cleveland.com, the Cuyahoga County Public Library, and the Lakewood Public Library. We are grateful to our corporate sponsor, First Interstate Properties, LTD, for supporting the series as well. I want to remind everyone about the next upcoming public policy session on April 18th at 6:30 p.m. at the Lakewood Public Library main branch. Philip Morris, columnist from the Plain Dealer, will moderate a session titled The Foster Care System in Northeast Ohio. During the question and answer portion of the evening's program, please write out your questions on the note cards provided, and our staff will collect the cards and bring them to the panel. It is with great pleasure that we welcome Brent Larkin to the podium this evening. Brent Larkin is the former Plain Dealer political reporter, columnist, and director of the editorial page. In October of 2002, Larkin was inducted into the Cleveland Press Club's Hall of Fame. Larkin retired from the Plain Dealer in May of 2009, but still writes a column for the newspaper's Sunday Forum section. It also appears on Cleveland.com. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Brent Larkin, who will introduce all of our panelists.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. I'm here to kind of facilitate a conversation that we're going to talk tonight exclusively or largely about state budgeting and how it is currently and in the past has impacted local government funding and its resources. And here to talk with us tonight are, to my immediate left, you're right, is Tim DeGeeter, who's in his second term as mayor of Parma. Greg Kordek, who I just met, who is a budget administrator for the city of Cleveland. He works for Sharon Dumas, who is the finance director, correct, still, and who's a longtime city and is a highly respected finance director. She's been there for a long time, and she's considered one of Mayor Jackson's stars. And at the far right is Rich Exner, who's been with the Plain Dealer and now with Cleveland.com for 30 years, would be a fair guess, about, close. And Rich is good at everything he does, and I'm not kidding about that, but he's carved out this niche where he produces these pieces that use statistics and history and current events and puts them all together in a really meaningful and readable way. And that's why Rich is here, because he should probably be standing up here. But we're going to talk about something called the Local Government Fund, and it's 83 years ago, when Ohio was still in the Great Depression. The governor of Ohio and the legislature were desperate for a new pool of money that would tide them over until the economy improved. And they cut a deal with mayors and managers and people who ran local governments throughout the state, where they essentially said, we want to enact a sales tax. And if you help us, and if you support that sales tax, we will share the money with you. And the local governments went along, and so was formed this deal between the state government and local governments that over the years has lasted more than eight decades, and in tough times, the state government had to cut back a little bit in its budgeting process every 2 years. But essentially, that deal has remained intact and hasn't been broken until John Kasich became governor in 2011 at the tail end of the second worst financial crisis in the country's history. And even though he benefited from a little bit of stimulus money, the governor began eating away at that deal and cutting way back on the budgeting, on sharing state resources with local governments. It is continued. We're now in, it's continued in every budget cycle, and it will continue again in this budget cycle if the governor has his way. So I've talked enough. I'm going to ask Tim, because he's the only elected official in the room tonight, I believe, to explain. You know, Parma was once the 10th biggest city in the state. It's probably still in the top 15. And explain in how it has impacted the people of Parma and your ability to deliver services, and give us some numbers, if you will, as to how the state cuts. And Tim was also a state member of the Ohio General Assembly for 6 or 8 years, and so he's been on both sides of this question. Tim?
Sure. Thanks, Brent. First, let me thank our host here, Cuyahoga County Library, which does a tremendous job for all communities here in Cuyahoga County, and we're just delightful to have two great branches and their executive offices located here in the 7th largest city in Ohio, Parma. And let me all welcome you in the audience to come and listen, and our host, Cleveland.com, League of Women Voters, and everybody else. So go back, and I'll start in 2011, Brent, because you brought up a history point that seemed to have gotten lost, a broken promise, in fact, in the state legislature from that cuts to the local government fund. And it was 2011, I was still in the legislature. It was my last year. It was right before I was going to take office as mayor in 2012. And I voted no on that 2011 biennium budget because, one, it cut those local government funds, eliminated the estate tax. So right there and then, even before taking office at City Hall on the corners of Ridge and Ridgewood, I knew my job was going to get much, much harder with that. And estate tax, the elimination of that has always come up in years past, and it just, for whatever reason, it was floated out, but never came, it never got punched through until that 2011 budget. So it made it much more challenging. I can tell you this, at the local level, being a mayor compared to a state representative, the state representative's job is like a kindergarten internship. It's a world of difference, and it's made much difficulties for Parma. In fact, going back to 2008, that's our benchmark year that we've used at the city to calculate that. Parma, with state cuts, and that includes local government funds, that includes estate tax, changes to the CAT tax, changes to the tangible personal property. We've lost over $23 million in state cuts from 2008. What we've had to do, and it wasn't very popular, but we would be a very different city, very different, had we not done it, and we had to enact a garbage fee. And there's city after city, whether the mayor's a Republican or Democrat, that has had to fill those holes, fill those gaps coming from Columbus. And even with the garbage fee, this past year, I think it was about $4 million that equates in those loss of state cuts. 4.1 this year estimates. The garbage fee that we did brings in 3.7. So it doesn't begin to fill the hole on it. So it's made it challenging for, maintenance of roads, employees keeping up with services, rec programs, quality of life stuff. We've had to reduce minimums in our fire department. One year we had to make the drastic move of closing pools. We've eliminated a senior meal program, although that may be totally eliminated with this proposed budget coming out of Washington. So it's all made it difficult. And looking back, we're trying to change the conversation now. Through the mayors, there's the Ohio Municipal League, which you're familiar. We have a new executive director, and using a sports analogy, we're trying to play a little offense instead of defense, because it seems that the cities down in Columbus around Capitol Square are always the stepchildren. We're the easy targets, so we're trying to say, let's do no more harm. So the Ohio Municipal League with the new executive director has been reinvigorated. There's also a new alliance, the Mayor's Alliance of the Big 30. That you may be familiar with, and I'm one of 4 new board of directors elected on that. Includes Mayor of Dayton, Nane Whaley, and the Mayor of Cincinnati on there. And it's trying to change the conversation with Columbus, going down there, trying to be a partner, saying, we need help. We need help with infrastructure. We need help with this heroin epidemic. Just today again, and it seems like every other day I get a text alert from our dispatch that another Narcan is being used by either our first responders, by our police or fire. You know, some of our secondary crimes are on that. So it's made it much, much more challenging, but also at the local level, the residents demand the same services. They, realize, but don't say, well, we still need this done. We still want this amenity. So it's been very, very challenging, but we've been very proactive. We've reduced employees. It's made it challenging also to bargain, collective bargain with our unions. And, that's kind of a broad overview, but we continue to outreach with our businesses, to track businesses because income taxes are our base. But again, it's made it extremely difficult, and Parma's not alone.
Probably no big city mayor in the country has been in the state, has been as critical of the governor on the way he's handled this as Frank Jackson, the 12-year mayor of Cleveland. I assume and last year the mayor asked Cleveland residents to increase the income tax. They did by a fairly comfortable margin. I assume, Greg, that is it fair to say that the mayor would not have sought that income tax increase, but for the significant cuts in local government funding from the state?
Yeah, that's absolutely true. So I have some remarks here as it relates to the municipal income taxes and our LGF as well, too. So the state, once again, is proposing a state centralized filing and collection system for municipal income tax, and this is specifically going to target corporate net profits. This proposal will allow the state to usurp from local governments the authority to impose and collect municipal tax on corporate net profits. This new authority would allow and facilitate any state policy to reduce or phase out this tax revenue at the local level. And this is very similar to what they did with the estate tax, the commercial activity tax, and the tangible personal property tax. In 2016, the city of Cleveland collected $44.4 million in net profit tax. The potential of redirecting this cash flow and any possible reduction or elimination of this would be detrimental to the city of Cleveland's financial stability. So the way that the flow of municipal dollars will work is as follows. Filers will file under the expanded Ohio Business Gateway, and the state will distribute tax receipts to municipalities net of a 1% collection fee. And this distribution to municipalities will be done on a quarterly basis. Municipalities will have no way of knowing the amount that received is accurate, as the cities won't have the ability to do any audits. The state will now assume that responsibility. The state is going to continue to allow the local authority to impose withholding tax on individual wages. However, the proposal is silent on collections. Currently, of course, the Central Collection Agency, or CCA, collects the City of Cleveland's local income tax and 50 other member communities as well, too. And on a monthly basis, CCA will advance funds to various cities, to the City of Cleveland and the other member communities. In terms of the City of Cleveland, the total annual collection for withholding tax in 2016 was $326 million. Our total income tax collection, which includes our restricted income tax, that's a separate pot of money that we use for capital and debt defeasance. We refer to it as the RIT. and the RIT is 1/9 of all income tax proceeds that the city receives. So our total income tax that we received that includes the RIT in 2016 was $370 million. This dollar amount represents 60% of the general fund's operating revenues. So any disruptions to the consistent cash flow of that would result in a potential inability to fund payroll, healthcare, pensions, debt service, and other vendor payments. In earlier discussions, the state has suggested that these cash flow issues could be remedied by obtaining lines of credit or going out for issuing additional debt by way of anticipation notes. So basically, we would be borrowing money in anticipation of receiving revenue. And this is going to cover the gap, because now we're going to get away from receiving monthly advances to quarterly advances from the state. But regardless of how we could cover that gap, there's no interest-free way in order to do so. That would cost cities and municipalities additional dollars. And the last point that I want to talk about is the LGF. The state is proposing, again, to change the formula for LGF, and they're going to reduce funding from municipalities deemed by the state and evaluated by the state as prosperous, and they're going to give to those communities that they deem or evaluate as in need. The state is proposing to develop a capacity-based mechanism for distributing LGF funds to municipalities. This will be assessed based upon the entity's taxing authority and the ability to raise revenue. In 2017, 95% of the LGF funds will be dispersed through the traditional method, and 5% will be dispersed under the new capacity-based method. This ratio will grow 90-10 in 2020, and ultimately the state is going to set the ratio at 80-20. So this is going to translate into a 5% reduction of the total amount that's prior to distribution. If the state determines that the city has the ability to raise revenue, our LGF distribution will be reduced. The specific amount at this time can't be quantified. We don't have enough information to quantify that, but we know that that dollar amount will be reduced, and as the ratios change, that reduction will grow. The state is proposing to eliminate the LGF municipal distributions. This amount is received directly from the state and is a component of our LGF. So what this means for the city of Cleveland, in 2017, this additional LGF was budgeted for $2.1 million. With the proposed state budget cuts, that would reduce what we would receive in 2017 by $1.4 million, and this would be eliminated in 2018 and thereafter. And my final point, I just want to talk about what our historical collections were with LGF. In 2016, the city of Cleveland received $24.6 million in local government funding. In 2011, we received $51.4 million. So there's been substantial decreases to amounts that we've received. Our accumulated loss since 2010 was $174 million. So this is why we had to go about increasing our income tax from 2% to 2.5%. And this is going to help us sustain a balanced budget as well as also deliver enhanced services.
How much will the income tax, the increase, raise every year for the city?
The income tax increase will yield approximately $80-some million.
So that will more than offset the loss, the annual loss that the people who work in Cleveland are paying for this, but it does more than offset the cuts to local government in LGF cuts.
Yes, it does.
Okay. Richard, are there any communities that are faring better and any that are targeted that fare especially poorly under the new state distribution system?
One of the distribution is proposed by the governor, and correct me if I'm wrong, Parma would gain a little bit on this. Cleveland would lose just on the estimate of the first 2 years, when only half of it's phased in, is using the state figures that they're estimating Cleveland would be down about $2 million. Parma would be up. Generally speaking, the urban counties as a group would lose money. The rural counties would gain. Generally speaking, because of this tie-in to ability to tax, where jobs are at, where people work, those communities generally would be losers, and places where people just live, say a Bay Village or maybe a township where people live and there aren't necessarily jobs, would lose because of the way this works out. I mean, there are exceptions, and it's complicated to go in the whole thing, but as a whole, the large counties in Ohio would the communities in those counties would lose, and counties in the smaller areas would gain. Not always the case within. As I said, Parma picks up a little bit under this latest formula change.
That's correct, Tim?
Brent, yeah, Rich is right, but as you know, what something looks like as a lame duck introduced budget by the governor, what it looks like today on the first day of spring. Let's see when the House gets done with it. Let's see what the Senate gets done with it. Then it goes to conference committee, as we know. So obviously, the budget has to be passed by the end of June. So obviously, we're watching that, and we're aware of that increase. But let's see what that happens as it goes through the legislature.
No one's mentioned, we haven't talked about the estate tax either, which is gone and is not coming back, and that has cost all communities in Ohio a significant amount of money. The governor's position on this is kind of interesting, and it is, and Tim, correct me if I'm wrong, it's pretty much, well, it's up to you to do a better job of running your government, and if you don't think you have enough money, go ask residents for more of it. But it's not our job to repeatedly take care of your problems. It's kind of interesting in that when the Trump administration introduces a budget that would dramatically cut funding for really some significantly important programs, state officials in Ohio and elsewhere scream bloody murder, but this governor seems to want to have it both ways. He doesn't want cuts from the state, but he thinks it's okay to cut money to local governments. Do you agree with that, Tim, or is it?
I would.
And have any of you ever tried? Has he ever reached out to any big city mayors and to talk about this?
First let me comment on the state tax. Parma in 2011, the same year that budget was passed, $2 million for us that we received. So again, that's significant dollars on it. And I'm pretty pragmatic, but the governor hasn't, in my tenure as mayor, has not been to Parma, at least I'm aware of. And when I was down in Columbus, instead of throwing rocks at the other side, I tried to reach across lines. 6 out of the 8 years I was in minority, was able to get things done. But it's changed in there. It's changed so much since the 6 years ago since I've been there. So, but I could tell you, watching the presidential elections and the debates, especially for coming days, nothing would get me more ginned up than hearing about this Ohio miracle, this Ohio recovery, when there's $2 billion sitting in a rainy day fund that was taken from cities, taken from schools, taken from libraries. Libraries haven't been immune to this, and they're not immune in this current budget. In fact, with receipts and the proposed cuts to the library fund, the County libraries proposed to lose over $1 million. So it makes it difficult and challenging at a local level to do that. So it's no different than what we've seen in Washington, what's happening down in Columbus, and already I can tell you that cities are working together. There's regional collaboration. We've been a big leader. I've been a big leader. Our administration working with other cities, whether that's on dispatch, on policing, printing. We have a print shop in Parma. We have a sign shop. We've made signs, street signs for the city of Lyndhurst, charging with them. So if we can work with other cities, were already doing that. My predecessor was doing that, and we've taken it a next step level, even more so. I still get asked, Mayor, why don't we have a rec center? Well, Seven Hills has one. We have a golf course and ice skating rink. So we've worked where we've tried to increase golfers folks using our ice skating rink from Seven Hills, and we've had Parma residents join the Seven Hills Rec Center as well. So it's made the job at the local level all that much harder. And if you think about it politically, it was a brilliant move, in politics. It was very Machiavellian in the fact that let's push it on to the city councils, the mayors who are front and center when they're out at the grocery store or at church or restaurant or, activity going, why are you doing this to me? Where most people have no clue what's going on in Columbus for the most part.
Brent, I think
Yes.
the estate tax is an interesting example of what's been going on here. In that, there's the debate about whether there should be an estate tax or not and whether that's a fair tax. And in Ohio, it's not the 50 or 60% tax rate that you hear about. In Ohio, it was a 7% rate, and it only applied to about 1 out of 14 estates, I believe. So it was very few people that paid it, and it was a lower rate, not like the federal one. But let's set that aside. If the policymakers decide to eliminate the estate tax, normally if you make a decision like that and you're a lawmaker, you have to deal with the ramifications. Oh, we're going to have less money here, so therefore we make up another tax or we do without it. In this case, 80% of the money went to the local governments, even though it was an Ohio-administered tax. So the people making the decision that it was bad policy to have an estate tax didn't have to deal with the lion's share of the ramifications of it. That was just put off on somebody else. And in a way, it's not unlike the elimination of the personal property tax years ago. That was a locally generated tax that somebody else at a different government body, a different group of legislators said, well, let's not have that tax anymore. But they didn't have to deal with the ramifications on the budget side of what happens when you eliminate it.
What about regionalization? We're standing in a county that is losing population. It's about to become or has already become it's the second biggest county in Ohio after being the largest for well over 100 years. And yet we still have about 55 government entities, and we've had piecemeal regionalization at best. Is that the answer to perhaps long-term to being more efficient with the dollars that taxpayers send you, Tim?
Well, look at the two examples of proposals or studies. There's one, 3 suburbs on the east side talked about it. I don't think anything went there. You still have East Cleveland and Cleveland, and look where that's at. I'm not even sure the latest turn on that one. So it may be difficult. You look at communities, and I've said this before, and others, whether you're talking about residents from Avon Lake, and someone says, oh, you're from Avon. They say, no, I'm from Avon Lake. Someone says, oh, you're from Parma. No, I'm from Parma Heights. So there's that sense of where you live. But getting beyond that, there's shared services that you can do without losing identity. You're seeing that with dispatch. You're going to see additional things where it turns and makes changes, and where equipment's more and more expensive, more challenging. Fortunately, we do have a good county partnership with county on a number of different programs, and we take advantage whatever we can. But talking about mergers of cities, I think it's challenging. Politics are involved, and it's going to take some time. And I just use those two examples where I don't see. But you can change the framework, change the dialogue, and talk about working together, whether that's sharing an animal warden, sharing rec programs. Those are things that are being done and can still and continue to help save cities and continue to be more efficient.
Greg, are there any examples of programs that the city is engaged in that of sharing of responsibilities or services that represent a creeping form of regionalism?
Yeah, I know that we do have memorandums of understanding with some of the bordering communities for our fire and EMS services. So that's part of that.
You've written about this in the past.
It just seems like it's a hurdle that nobody can get beyond, but it also seems silly to look at the map and what is it? We have 59, I think, municipalities in Cuyahoga County, and you mentioned Franklin County. When the estimates are released later this week, it'll probably be officially larger. I think it already is.
This week?
Yeah, but and they have, what, maybe 12 or 13. Now, there's a history to that, but it seems silly now to have, you know, all these many communities.
I have to ask this, Tim. Do you foresee any possibility in your lifetime of what is referred to as unigov, which is all these communities agreeing to merge into one government entity in the county?
Are we talking Indianapolis or
Yes,
here?
yeah, or Louisville.
Right, Louisville. In my lifetime, maybe my son's, I doubt mine. But you know, you could see steps. I mean, there's steps with, you know, the jails, county, talking about jails, you know, looking at that. I've heard fire proposed out there. You know, other ones. I'll use one example on a fire. You know, each city, a ladder truck is over $1 million. That's something that cities should look at on it. And I've heard those kind of discussions, not widely discussions, but should we take a look at that? So the Unigov, you know, I could see pieces of it maybe down in the future, but I couldn't see a full-blown like what Indianapolis, Marion County there has, or in Louisville.
I believe it was. I think you have alluded to this. Sometime within the last decade, we had at least 3 of the richest communities in Cuyahoga County joined with Woodmere. It was what? Woodmere and Moreland Hills and Pepper Pike and Orange. 3 of those communities, which are, you know, in the top, probably in the top 5 in terms of wealth in Cuyahoga County, they could not agree to join forces. Was it police and fire or just fire? They could not agree to the simplest of all regionalization plans.
And I don't have the details or recall on that. I just remember watching that from afar, from on the other side of the river. And obviously, there's a Cuyahoga County mayor as a manager, so I don't know what the actual stumbling blocks were on that. But that was one of the closest on discussions, I should say, that were made public, that were out there beyond the East Cleveland merger.
Well, if it's not Unigov, and I'm kind of straying from the subject a little bit, what do we do? What does Cuyahoga County do or what should we be doing to at the very least, stabilize our population loss and perhaps begin growing the county in the city of Cleveland and in the inner ring suburbs? There are large swaths of vacant land, and still too many empty structures that could possibly, you know, over the long haul, free up, you know, a desperate need for new housing. What should we be doing?
Well, I think we have made great strides. Let's go back when I was in the legislature. It's a term we haven't heard much here in Ohio, Brent, and that's called the brain drain, where, you know, we had, you know, sons like yours who, you know, go off to universities, get their degree, and then move to Charlotte, move to Chicago, have not come back because there was no jobs here. You start seeing, you know, investment in downtown. Downtown living's huge among these millennials. We, even Parma, have attracted the millennials, and I know in the census data we got reached out to from a urban studies professor at Ball State saying how, you know, we had a high number, one of the most percentages of any cities. So we're trying to market ourselves as a city, the inner ring suburb, being close to Cleveland, having those amenities, you know, playing on our ethnicity of Polish village, Ukrainian village amenities. So on a bigger picture, I think the county can be a shared partner on that. I think you're already having great dialogue among the mayors. I can speak for the southwestern suburb mayors, and that includes both Democrat and Republicans. For the last 6 years, once a month on Fridays, we get together for lunch. Each mayor hosts a breakfast in their city, and it's a great way to both commiserate and collaborate on there. So there's great ideas that come out of there. And the county has been a good host. And I think we need to, again, going back to that new alliance with the Big 30, the Mayor's Alliance, changing the conversation with Columbus, understanding that these cities, these big cities, we're the economic engines. We're the ones that help try to create jobs, so that helps bolster it. But again, going back, it's looking at shared services, trying to be more efficient, and that's every job's mayor. And I think a number of us are doing that. I can say I am.
Well, the city of Cleveland's main source of revenue, like any other city, is income taxes. So any strides and efforts in order to create jobs is what will be really the only saving grace when it comes to making a city financially stable.
What should we be doing, Rich, that we're not doing?
About that one. All these failed attempts, and you can't get beyond this. Maybe transportation is a little different. I didn't get to town until the mid-'80s. How the heck did they pull that off with RTA to take all those transit agencies and make it one?
It was a ballot issue. It was I think it's the 1% sales tax it was driven by the Cleveland Press. I worked there at the time. My role in it was infinitesimal, but it was the old Cleveland transit system was going belly up. They didn't have any money. It didn't have any money. It was poorly run, and it was. The press championed this idea of merging them all and put it on the ballot, and it passed pretty easily. I think it passed in '74.
One other thing on this, Brent, I think too, if you look at Columbus, we're a rural state driven down in Columbus. The bigger counties, ones you mentioned, whether it's Franklin, we're a donor county. More money goes down to Columbus that comes back. And so if you really want to change the conversation, I think that's where it needs to begin. And I really think the big picture is term limits. I mean, they've been a train wreck for Ohio. I really believe that, and I said that when I was there. Not that I wanted to stay in Columbus long term, because I would joke and say my favorite thing about Columbus was seeing it in my rearview mirror coming back from the legislature. So you really need to change the dynamics, and for whatever reason, whether the public doesn't understand them, they think they're a good thing. What's happened is it's caused more campaign contributions to go on. It's made the lobbyists more powerful, and it's been a revolving door down there.
One of the big, perhaps the big argument that it was one of the biggest lies that the advocates used was it would create this new generation of citizen legislators who would go down there, and they would be doctors and lawyers and bakers and postmen, and they were going to change the way Ohio worked for the better. And it's just laughable the way it's turned out, because you have this never-ending office swapping. You have, out in this area, Tom Patton's gone back. I could name a dozen different people who have gone back and forth from the Senate to the House to the Senate to the House, and which defeats the entire purpose. There never really was a good purpose to term limits, but the only people who like term limits are the voters, and they remain enormously popular. And that is why there's been talk for, Gordon Gee was the one who was really pushing extending term limits from 8 to 12, and that hasn't even found its way to the ballot yet. So any questions from you folks that these gentlemen can answer? Michael?
So you mentioned the Woodmere, Pepper Pike, Orange, and but those are relatively prosperous suburbs with pretty low real estate tax levels. Don't you think that the mergers, if they were to occur, would be from suburbs that are having difficulties and with high tax rates already, and where there may be a little bit more desperation, like in the case of the transit agencies?
Well, from my perspective, looking at it, not having a deep dumpster dive on what's going on in East Cleveland and Cleveland, that's an example you just set. That still can't get done. Also, with those prosperous east suburbs where things are good, to me, that would make it easier to do it. But I don't know all the details in there. So you got both ends on there, and neither of them gotten done. So I don't know what the hiccup in the gate is.
Yes, ma'am.
I wish someone from the state was here, because I don't understand and wonder what the argument is from the governor and from the state legislators, because to me, the constituents of both the state and the city are residents of the state. So what they're doing is impacting residents. And certainly the legislators hear from the mayors and the people who run the cities that are being impacted by what the state is doing. So what do they say in response to, Mayor, when you say to the legislators and to the governor, and you have a chance to talk to him, don't you understand that what you're doing is impacting the very people of the state that you are that you represent? I don't get the logic.
That's a great point. I assume you all heard her. The question, she was making the point that she doesn't understand the logic of them and of state people punishing the people they represent, essentially. And Michael tried and I tried to pretty hard to convince or get a member of the Ohio General Assembly, preferably a Republican member of the Ohio General Assembly, because they have about 70% of the members now in the House, and they've always had, at least since I was actually young when they took control of the Ohio Senate, and they'll never give that up. I asked Tom Patton, I sent an email to Matt Dolan. In fairness, they are in session this week, I believe, but we had no luck in convincing any Republicans to come up here and attempt to justify what they're doing. Rich?
It seems like the rural or small areas have been more successful in being heard on some of these things. I was just thinking about the transit funding in Ohio for local transit agencies is like nothing compared to comparable states. Well, where's transit used? It's used everywhere, but the heavy dominance of where people use transit is in our three or four urban counties. And it's like non-existent almost in comparison to other states. Or on this idea of the local government fund, time and again, the state discussed that they were going to cut it in half because they needed the budget cuts and they didn't think it was right or whatever. But if you look at the detail on it, they did cut the fund in half, except that if your county was small enough, there are 22 counties that there was a floor put in there for them. They couldn't go below it. Some counties never took a cut at all. Other ones didn't take that full cut, like the larger counties. So for whatever reason, the smaller areas have been able to be heard on some of these things. I'm thinking back to way too long ago when Celeste was the governor and Voinovich was the mayor of Cleveland. It seemed like they worked, one was a Democrat and one was a Republican, but it seemed like they were able to work together and to be heard, and the legislature as a whole could be heard in Columbus to try to let the voice of the urban area be heard a little bit louder.
Anyone have? Let me take a shot at that also. Another one of the reasons that the governor has used and the legislature will also use to gut even further local government funding in this budget is the fact that state revenues it's been a shortfall. They're not taking in as much tax revenue as they originally projected. But look, no one likes to pay, everyone likes tax cuts, but when the governor and the General Assembly began in 2013, really ramped up the massive tax cuts, they did so promising that those tax cuts, the revenue loss would be more than offset by the enormous job growth that would be visited upon Ohio, because it now is about to be, it would become a low tax state. I believe Rich probably knows. And since of the, okay, how many months has John Kasich been governor? 70 or 80, 90 months. Like 2 of those months, Ohio has exceeded the national average in job growth, and in every other month, it has been below the national average in job growth. Do you have any stats off the top of your head on that?
In particular in the last few months. But when I look back at every governor, Republican or Democrat, going back to as long as they had 4-year terms, and Ohio's always done worse over each gubernatorial term than the national. And it didn't matter whether it was, Strickland or Kasich, or basically what you're saying is I agree with. I just don't know the number on a particular month.
The whole premise of the tax cuts was Ohio's economy would boom, and it hasn't happened. Yes,
Yeah.
yeah, something.
I mean, they have the same argument at the federal level, and it didn't work.
Correct, right.
That's also been going on since when Taft was governor as well. That's where all that first started with the cat tax, and that was
Yes,
supposed to be the
but then
savior.
we had tax
And then that's
reform.
been changed
Yes.
again and again and
Yes.
again.
Yes, there's a hand right there. Yes, sir.
Mr. Larkin, I want to thank you and congratulate you for having this meeting.
Michael Barron is the one who should be thanked.
Well, I also think you should have more of these meetings, not just like once a year. And the mayor should attend them, and any other official should be attending them also to answer questions by the public. Don't keep things secret. The same thing with the newspaper. You guys seem to be scared of putting stuff in the newspaper, that you should be putting in it as far as investigative journalism.
Can you
few
mind
years
if
back-
never mind. I was going to ask for an example, please.
Well, a few years back, we drained a swamp here. We put Demora in jail. We put Russo in jail. The Plain Dealer had a lot of articles about corruption in
Correct,
this area.
correct.
Now, the Plain Dealer should put an emphasis on corruption in Columbus and draining the swamp in Columbus.
It's a fair point, I guess, yes.
I mean, a lot of instances, the Plain Dealer has shrunk so much, they put very few articles of worth to the public in the paper.
Well, I'm not an employee, but the shrinking, the paper might not be as thick as it isn't as thick as it used to be, but newspapers have this is not something that's unique to Greater Cleveland. I'm sure you know that. It's newspaper. There's only 2 newspapers who are experiencing a huge circulation boom right now, and they happen to be the New York Times and the Washington Post, and there's a very good reason for that, which you can probably figure out. The Washington Post just hired 60 new reporters, but they're the exceptions to the rule. Newspapers are having a tough time right now, and they're trying to get by with far less revenue than they used to.
Somebody should file some kind of lawsuits to investigate what's going on in Columbus. You should use that sunshine law powers to see what's going on in the books down there. What is Mr. Kasich doing with that $2 billion slush fund down there? How come nobody has a report on that?
Well, he's not doing anything, I believe, right? Is that correct? Right.
The banks? Mr. Kasich's friends?
No.
I'll
Gotcha.
give you another example. The city of Cleveland is giving, close to $100 million to the Q renovation?
That's a little more complicated than that,
Well,
and it
that's where
hasn't
the
been
tax
approved
money's
yet.
going. And for
Pardon?
a $2 million dirt track that Mayor Jackson is billing for his friends? Come on, get serious.
Yes, ma'am.
Mayor DeGeeter, is the Municipal League working on this whole issue of the managed care tax and what it's going to do, not just to local governments, but to public transportation?
The-
RTA stands to be wiped out at
The-
the end of 2018.
Question concerns is the Municipal League working on this Medicare and future of public transportation?
I can say that probably the RTA, I'm sure, has themselves, the other transit authorities have lobbyists down there working on that. That's not so much necessary a Ohio Municipal League issue as what you heard from person to my left here on what's being proposed in the budget, the centralization of collection of taxes, the local government funds. But I can't say specifically. I try to pay attention down in Columbus, but also trying to make sure we're doing our job and keeping our streets safe here in in Parma. But I'm well aware that those conversations are taking place down in Columbus. But I can't say whether the municipal league is specifically on that, but it affects everybody without question.
And you gotta weigh in because people will not be able to get to work, they will not be able to go shopping. I mean, people who don't have cars, especially elderly people.
And I can tell you too, I'll say this: there's a number of mayors that are also on the RTA board, and I'm sure that board is also going down having conversations with our legislators, and specifically our ones here in our area. I can say this: looking at a figure, 90% of Ohioans live in the 6 largest metro areas, but it's unbelievable that we're and you go into Columbus, on Capitol Square, it's such a rural township-driven mentality. And I don't know why that is, why that has always, that paradigm has existed, but it's gotten worse, I think, the way with the structure of the majority and the overwhelming structure. I mean, we just, in 2010, we were in the majority. Democrats were majority. Then you had redistricting, and we could have another forum whole on that issue. But until that changes, I think it's going to be difficult for the Democrat Party to make a major comeback.
That's a great point that Tim makes about control of the Ohio General Assembly for all but maybe 2 years of the last 70. The Speaker of the Ohio House has been from a more rural part of Ohio, and 2 years Armin Budish was Speaker, and that was kind of a borderline flukish thing, and it went away when Ted Strickland went away, and that's not going to change anytime soon. Yes, sir.
Where's the county in assisting the cities? Anything as far as money or assistance?
I can tell you on a couple different things. One, Parma, we do a regional dispatch with Parma Heights, Brooklyn, Brook Park. We're looking at other partners. We were able to apply for and receive a grant for technology just shy of $1 million. I can tell you with the Cuyahoga County, as well as the Cuyahoga County Council, they've been a good partner for the cities. Additionally, they've had the last couple of years where we can apply for grant funds for materials to help with road repairs. There's been a number of road projects here in Parma and continue going out in the next 2 years. In fact, next year, the one section between Pleasant Valley, which is the worst by Normandy, Broadview State, that's being redone, $3.6 million. And I try to have lunch with Armin Budish once a month. I was on his leadership team in Columbus. What's nice having him as a state rep and having that relationship is usually if I call him on a cell phone and need something, I don't get his voicemail, he'll pick up on the phone for me. So we continue to look at the county as a partner, but also their budgets are stretched too, but they've been helpful.
Greg,
Sure. Is not the trend across the country for states to eliminate their estate tax? And how have other states, especially Rust Belt states, how have they done with it? Academic research to examine, like from our universities?
The question concerns the estate tax. Isn't it a trend to get rid of them across the country, especially in the Rust Belt? I think the short answer to that is yes.
I would believe so. I mean, there's two schools of hats. You don't want to, others call it a death tax. I get that. The question or the perspective from a mayor or local government was that was done without just taken away, without talking about replacement. I think Rich pointed out to that, just going, hey, the policymakers in Columbus just took it away and said, okay, you're on your own for it. Now, I've also heard some cities, some more wealthier suburbs saying, well, we've never relied on that. We've always set that aside. But, again, that helps put police officers on the street, firefighters, and makes it challenging. So aside from the philosophical aspect of the state tax, by taking a state budget and just eliminating it, putting it in, and it was, I believe, slipped in as an amendment going into it. There wasn't like this great policy decision going when the budget. It was and the budget's usually the biggest Christmas tree bill ornament bill going through. So understanding the philosophical aspects on it, but coming from a local government aspect, There was no phase out. There was just no accountability coming back going, what do you do? So the cities are left holding the bag once again.
Your local reps that you knew, I mean, there was no heads up on this?
Yeah, I was in Columbus. I voted no on it. I was actually in the legislature in 2011. I voted no on that state budget bill. Again, as I don't know if you were here from the beginning, that was in July, knowing I was going to be the mayor starting in 2012, voting no on that budget. And most Democrats, I believe, did vote no at the time. I don't recall specifically, but I can tell you that moment in June, knowing that my life just got a lot harder going into City Hall.
When the estate tax was eliminated and the local government fund reduced, a lot of what I hear every time we write a story about it is that these decisions are best made at the local level. People can decide whether or not they're getting the services for their local tax dollars. What's happened, I think it's 80 cities have increased, cities or villages across Ohio have increased their income tax since these cuts went into place. Now, some of them obviously would have anyway. But so what happened? I mean, we're talking about, I guess you didn't in Parma during this time, but Cleveland did, Chagrin Falls did, Rocky River did. It's the whole range of cities. But some towns, if Chagrin Falls or Rocky River raises their tax, it's easier to, take care of your services that need to be done. Well, if it's a town of lesser means, I don't know, maybe a Maple Heights or Garfield Heights, look at the burden if you add tax on that. I think that some of these funds, whether it was the estate tax or the local government fund, helped even that out, because what happens if a tax goes too high in a town? People say, oh, I'm not going to live there because the tax is too high. So the more people leave and the tax base goes down, and then they have to raise the tax even higher.
Greg, I have a couple questions related to the City of Cleveland services. Prior to, in the past few years, there have been a lot of complaints about, and a lot of complaints from council members about neighborhood services. There have been complaints from that you would see in the Plain Dealer and on Cleveland.com about the condition of the streets in Cleveland, and which were pretty bad. That they somehow seemed to get they got a lot better as in the days leading up to the convention, but streets in the neighborhoods are still pretty tough shape. And one question is, what's going to be done with the money? Is there a plan to spend the tax money? And another is, how come the city doesn't ticket cars during snow bans or parking bans to increase its revenue?
Well, I could comment as it relates to the service enhancements. And yeah, our streets department is going to receive some additional dollars for pothole filling. There's going to be rounds of street sweeping. There's going to be leaf removal. We're hiring 93 additional police officers. We're going to fund another ladder company in fire. EMS is going to gain 68 EMTs and EMDs. So these are just some of the highlights on what we're going to do with the additional 0.5% increase. As it relates to ticketing the vehicles, I personally don't have a response to that. That's a matter of policy with the Division of Police, and I can't comment on that.
Tim, is there ever go ahead, I'm sorry.
Stop me if I missed something earlier, but in Lakewood, we've recently been talking a bit about the changes that the state has made to municipal income tax, for example, in 2014. And a couple of different people who seem fairly knowledgeable have told me that looking out over the long term, they worry that the state's end game is to just really take this over, take it out of the hands of cities completely. So I wondered if any of you could comment on, do you see something like that?
Yeah. I know in Lakewood, Mayor Summers has been a big advocate, and I'm on the executive committee for the first ring suburbs. He's also been very involved. Last year, I think it was House Bill 5 was the tax where that was the conversation started, and the Cuyahoga County mayors and managers, a number of groups, the Ohio Municipal League, all pushed on that, and that centralization of collection of taxes that was spoke about earlier. They believe that's the cart before the horse, that's where the streamline's going. And again, is one of those, Columbus doesn't always know best on this. And I think there's also a 1% fee attached to it that the cities would lose on that. So it's another taking away revenue from the city. So again, Mayor's Alliance, First Ring Suburbs, Cuyahoga County Mayors and Managers, we have a lobbyist that works on our behalf. We go down on lobby day, are all aware of it and been trying, again, changing the conversation with it. So that is a real fear among mayors and managers throughout the state.
I think it's also important to note that the Republican governor's track record in terms of getting his big budget requests approved by the Republican-run legislature has been pretty dismal. That in terms of his ongoing requests for energy taxes and for the size, he wants to cut the income tax and he wants to increase other taxes, and the legislature has thwarted him in every budget cycle on some of his major requests, and they will do it. The legislature will do that again. I'm fairly certain. When it comes to the local treatment of local governments, I think it's unlikely that there will be significant changes to that. But the governor, he was on Meet the Press Sunday talking about the need. He was lecturing the Congress on the need for bipartisan cooperation on a health care bill, which is obviously it's not a bad idea. He wants Democrats and Republicans to sit down and as president, the president to sit down and make sure everybody's in the room and get a health care bill done that everyone can live with. And he said over and over and over again, we have to do this with Democrats. However, he has been governor for 6 years. And do you know of any instance where the governor has ever sat down in a room with members of Republican and Democratic members of the legislature and spent a meaningful amount of time to working on a bipartisan approach to getting anything done?
I don't. I'll say this. I like the national John Kasich speak better than the state John Kasich speak.
That's a good way to put it. But, you can't have it both ways. If you want to talk about doing that on a health care bill, well, come back home and do it and sit down with whoever the minority leader in the House is this week and talk about a bipartisan approach to tax reform or local government funding or most importantly, education funding. Yes, sir.
I'm here late.
Is that you, Zach?
Yes.
I'm sorry.
I'm here late because I was actually driving here from Columbus. And
why don't you introduce yourself? This is Zach Schiller. What's your title, Zach? Is it
I'm at Policy Matters, Ohio.
I know that. Are you executive? Zach is the executive director of. Okay, he's from Policy Matters, a good government think tank.
Good news, since most of this is bad news, even if I haven't heard it, I think I have the idea. My impression, at least, they're right now involved in doing the House budget. And I believe that at least the proposal to take over the municipal income tax collection of business profits is going nowhere. And in the House. And they may do something where they'll come up with a way for, in future, they could move in that direction. But I don't think they're going to approve that in this budget. And I think that it does show the very strong and effective opposition of the mayors. I was in Columbus and I heard at least 15 mayors testify, including Mayor Summers and others, from a lot of communities that aren't, in fact, big cities, testifying about this, and but not just testimony. So I think it shows that there is an opportunity to sometimes push back against these things effectively.
Zach is saying, and I don't know if he could pick that up, that there is some evidence perhaps that local mayors are making a difference with the legislature in terms of their pushback on some of these changes. Tim?
And that goes, again, we're trying to change the conversation with Columbus, trying to pull them in as a partner, showing that we're economic engines and having conversations with them. So that's good news. I'll feel better what it looks like in June again, and as it goes through the House, goes through the Senate, meaning the state budget. But again, whether it's the Mayor's Alliance, the Cuyahoga County Mayors and Managers, the Ohio Municipal League. And again, the Ohio Municipal League is now being very proactive. I'm also sits on that board of trustees as well. So it's shaping the conversation and trying to have better dialogue, better understanding that cities are hurting, and as well as different policy think tanks like yourself or others down in Columbus.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
I wanted to ask all the panelists their opinion about the statewide issue that passed last fall for congressional redistricting, and wonder what you thought about its possibilities are to lead for better government.
The question is about the state, about redistricting, statewide issue, ballot. There's talk about putting something on the ballot again this year, is there not? You don't know.
They did the State House, but not the congressional.
That's right.
Correct.
I don't know enough about it. Rich is right. It's just for the congressional districts, not necessarily the state house districts, right?
The other way around.
Other way, correct. On it, I know it's bipartisan, but I don't have enough details on it to speak.
This has been an ongoing problem in Ohio, and it is the fact that we have these horrible congressional, I'm going to get my soapbox for 1 second, legislative and congressional district is primarily the fault of the Democrats. They had a perfect opportunity to do something about this in 2009, 2010, am I right on the years, I believe, and they never thought Ted Strickland was going to lose the governorship, so, and they never thought that they would lose 5 out of 5 statewide races, so they told the Republicans to go to hell. We are not going to change the way we draw congressional and legislative districts. That's literally what happened. And then they lost every single election that was on the ballot. And the Republicans got the pencil, and, paybacks can be tough.
And I just looked at this a couple weeks ago. The result of it were Republicans with no Democrats at the table. The last 2 times the districts were drawn. The 3 elections that have happened since the last maps were drawn, so the maps last from 2002 through the 2012 to the 2020 election. There's never been more lopsided. And there was a single race, I don't think it was decided with less than 20 points, which means the voters don't have a say whether you're talking about one of the 4 Democratic districts or one of the 12 Republican districts. It's a given what party's going to win.
And then they drew this obscene, I see it, 1 second, please. They drew this obscene congressional district that runs from the center of Toledo to the east side of the city of Cleveland for about 110 miles or so along Lake Erie, and it's the worst, probably the worst drawn district in Ohio, and it was drawn by the Democrats as part of a deal they made with Bob Bennett to get to get Democratic votes for a redistricting bill. So they blew this more than the Republicans. Yes, ladies?
There are a few of us here from the League of Women Voters, which is sponsoring tonight. We have an update on that.
On the redistricting stuff?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do think people confuse the 2 different votes for redistricting, that we already did have a vote in our state where we voted to change the group that districts for our within the state elections. So, but now we still have to redistrict for the way we elect people to the federal groups. So there is a move right now, and obviously the legislators have decided they are not going to put forth anything on this. But there is a move to get petitions signed. It's just beginning. But there will be, hopefully, on the ballot, probably not till 18, I think. Yeah. To do this very thing.
A
So watch
constitutional
for it.
amendment? Are you talking a constitutional amendment? I
To
see.
recreate the way the districts are drawn,
Okay.
to mirror the way it's drawn now within the state.
Okay.
If you understand.
Good.
Okay.
Good.
Or, yeah, the way it soon will be,
Aren't we
because we
supposed-
already approved it.
Aren't we supposed to lose a seat or two by 2020?
We always lose. Every census we lose. We've been losing. When I started in the early 70s, Ohio started paying attention to this. Ohio had 25 electoral votes. What did it have this year? 18? 18? Which is a pretty big drop in, four census. Time.
Would have been another, the birthplace of president. Expanded, but
Yes.
thanks.
Yes. He did when he won one state. Michael?
Yeah, I have a question. It seems like in things like gun control and fracking and now the collections of business taxes, that the history of home rule is being violated more and more. Could I get your perspective on that? And do local municipalities have any recourse when they feel that their home rule has been violated?
I mean, that issue's been going on since I first was in the legislature, and maybe longer, but from my perspective, going back to, I got down there at the end of 2003, that you keep seeing a chipping away. Remedies is the city's final lawsuit, challenging that specific bill and that issue. I think the one that stands out the biggest was Cleveland on the predatory lenders. Then they take that, and Brent maybe will speak a little bit more authority on this, but the city of Cleveland passed an ordinance on that predatory lending, the payday lenders maybe, and then the state legislature came up and preempted those the city of Cleveland to be able to have its ability to regulate on that. So, it's ongoing conversation. I mean, there's home rule. There's also the aspect of funding issues, but it seems that's been going on for a couple decades now.
Then the Supreme Court, as you know, Michael, the Supreme Court, the Ohio Supreme Court is the primary institution that has undercut home rule. The most recent glaring example was in the city of Cleveland on its long-standing residency rule, which it took away cities' power. They've been between the legislature and the courts on residency and things like red light cameras, payday lending, Fannie Lewis law, and I'm probably missing other examples. The home rule is barely worth the paper it's printed on now. And in the 60s and 70s, there was this powerful and wildly controversial home rule provision in Cleveland. There was a charter amendment that the courts repeatedly upheld, which this court would not. And that amendment was, some of you may remember it, was that the Cleveland police were required, it was a requirement that they earn 3% more, at least 3% more than the police officers in any other large Ohio city. And it was an ongoing thing that repeatedly cost the city of Cleveland money. It's called the 3% rule. And eventually in the 80s, the voters took it away. And that was not an easy thing either. Okay. Yes, sir.
Are you going to have more of these type meetings?
Michael has these all the time. He's the most conscientious fellow. Yeah, he said he'll talk.
You say we have a dictatorship in Columbus or a democracy?
We have a democracy, and and we will. In 2018, the voters will return to the ballot. And look, Ohio is it's a battleground. It's in the years we always elect governors and attorney generals and secretary of states and treasurers and auditors in a non-presidential election year. That's the way the Constitution set it up. And in those years, 2018 Ohio is a red state, period, end of discussion. It's not a, quote, battleground state. It's a battleground state only in presidential elections. So, and Democrats can win in Ohio, but it's more difficult.
One of the writers of Plain Dealer recently, possibly I think it was in the past 2 months or so, made a statement in his column saying that this situation doesn't stand a chance in hell of changing in the next 4 to 6 years. It's going to stay this way because...
What situation? I'm sorry.
The Columbus dictatorship will stay in power. They'll have all the votes. None of the votes will change. They'll always have the majority.
Well, that depends on the national economy and the national political climate. But the governor and all the state constitutional office holders will all be out at the end of 2018. That's not speculation, that's fact. None of them will hold the same job in 2019 because they're prohibited from seeking re-election because of constitutional term limits. They're all out. So if there's a dictatorship, it's going to be new dictators.
Revolving musical chairs. When you're in the Senate, you go to the Congress.
There is some truth to that. Yes, but there will be a new governor.
Thank you, Brent.
Okay, thanks for coming.